We're in Daniel chapter 2, verses 24 to 35. Humble yourself. I wrote up here because it didn't have much room. Humble yourself before God. Next point. If you think that you can somehow come before God without a humble spirit, the opposite is to have an arrogant, prideful spirit. That doesn't work so well. It does not work so well. Humility is one of those things that we don't think a lot about because we seem to believe that humility means weakness. Meekness doesn't mean weakness. So being humble means putting other people before yourself. And it's normal for men to want the praise of others, wouldn't you agree? I mean, we all would like to have somebody, if it's your job, you want somebody to appreciate what you're doing in your job. You don't want them to be always giving you negative feedback. And when you do something right or you do something well, it would be, it used to be in the past, that the bosses were always very stern. And they would never say, "Good job, Mary, good job, Bill." They would be just very quiet when it came to that because they felt that if they said something like that, that you might slack off. And that's really, that's just not how that should be. And people who have not operated that way have proven that. Often lies are told that make it appear that we were the one with a solution to a problem when in reality it was someone else. Do you recall there was a movie quite a while ago called 9 to 5?
Yeah.
And Dolly Parton and who else? What were there were three gals, I think.
Jane Fonda.
Jane Fonda.
And Lily Tomlin.
Lily Tomlin. Okay, good.
And Dabney Coleman.
Yeah, that's right. And what were the ladies' big complaint that
Their boss was a jerk.
he kept taking credit for what they did.
Yeah.
They came up with a good idea. He basically poo-pooed it, but then took it to the boss and said, "This is what I think we ought to do." "Oh, good job," slap him on the back and that kind of thing. So he would lie and say it was his idea when in effect it was somebody else's. So that's immediately what I thought about when I wrote these words down.
The scoundrel.
When in reality it was someone else that did it. But this is why we read this, Proverbs 16:18. Pride comes before the fall. If you see somebody pulling that, I just go, just wait. His day is coming. His pride is going to lead him to a downfall. I don't have to say a word. It's going to happen. Even though Daniel could have easily taken credit for interpreting the king's dream, right?
Mm-hmm.
He could have when he was brought before the king to interpret it, and the king asked him the question, "Can you interpret this?" Let's see what he said. Having received the answer to the king's dream from God in a vision, Daniel went to Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, in order to stop the executions. Okay, stop. Don't kill anybody. Because the reason they're going to kill the wise men of all Babylon, and Babylon was a big empire, the biggest in the world at that time. was because no one could interpret his dream. They couldn't tell him what his dream was, and they couldn't interpret it. But
They couldn't interpret their own dreams.
that's exactly right. Of course, Arioch told the king that he found someone who could tell the king what his dream meant. Quite often, someone who's like second or third in command to the king will go, "Oh, king, live forever. I've solved your problem. I found somebody that could do this." Of course, the king immediately asks Daniel, and by the way, that was in verse 25. Verse 26, the king immediately asks Daniel, "Are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it?" Now, here,
No, God can.
here's, well,
There's one in heaven.
now, this is when someone could be tempted to take credit for the dream. Can you tell me what this dream was all about? Can you interpret the dream? Yeah, I've got a special gift. It's an anointing, and I know. No. Pride pride was standing at the door, waiting for the opportunity to claim the fame. But Daniel didn't fall for that. This is what he replied, verse 27, 28. No wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. I can't do it, and he's saying no magician or enchanter. Well, the king already knows this because he's already given them the challenge and they weren't up for it. In other words, Daniel's saying, this isn't from me. Don't get the idea that this is some power I've got. This is from God. And this is not from one of the gods. This is not from the God that you Babylonians, major god called Marduk. It's not from that God that I get this information from. It's from the one and only living God in heaven that was the creator of all things. And he deserves the glory and the honor for what you're about to hear. God has shown you, O king, verse 28, what will happen in the future. Here are the things that came to your mind as you lay in your bed. So he's just kind of like saying, close your eyes. This is what you saw as you laid in your bed. Now, Daniel spoke of the king's dream. Verse 29. God, the revealer of mysteries, showed him what was going to happen in the days to come. So he's telling him, he's saying, and not only am I going to tell you your dream,
I'm going to tell you what it means.
I'm going to tell you that God is going to show you what's going to happen in your future. He's going to tell you what your future is, which is what everybody in the audience would be going, ooh, tell me what's going to happen to me in the future. That's why people go to crystal ball gazers and tarot card readers and doing whatever. They somehow want to get an edge. They want to know what's going to happen. Which, by the way, in most cases, we really don't want to know what's going to happen. Because it's not all, well, I think seldom is it all good. There's going to be things that are going to say, oh, well, forget I asked that question.
Well, as the baker could ask,
Yeah.
what's going to happen to me?
Yeah, that's right.
But that's an interesting one for another time.
Yeah, Joseph and, yeah. That's when he didn't want to know.
He's gonna bake his last loaf.
Now, Daniel said, "Why did God reveal this mystery to me?" Verse 30. "It wasn't because I have greater wisdom than all other living men, but so that you, O king, may know what went through your mind." This is not, I'm not going to tell you this because I've got this great ability and because I want you to be impressed with me. But what God is doing is He is going to show you what's going to happen to you and what went through your mind. Because think about this, God has decided for, well, we have the advantage of we can look back on this and we can see what was going to happen. Because I'm very sure that Nebuchadnezzar, the king, thought he was going to be king forever, or at least for certainly for his lifetime, which could be a day or two, it just depends. The king was meant to understand what God had in mind for him. Now, this is the dream. Ooh, can't wait to see what this is. What was the dream? And I would have loved to have seen the look on Nebuchadnezzar's face when he starts telling them exactly what his dream was.
I bet he could catch a bird with his mouth open.
Yeah. You looked, verse 31, and before you stood a large statue, enormous, dazzling, awesome in appearance. The head was made of pure gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs were of bronze. Verse 32. Its legs of iron, its feet partially of iron and partly of baked clay,
Modern times.
but not by human hands. Oh, pardon me, I skipped over that. That was verse 33. And while you were watching this in your dream, a rock was cut out of the mountain, not by human hands. So this rock is cut out, and no human is doing this. This is just like happening. It struck the statue on its feet and smashed them, verse 34. It struck the statue on its feet and smashed them.
Which is really interesting that it was the feet of iron and clay that was struck, not the other parts.
Oh, we're going to see what's going to happen to them. Then the whole statue was broken into pieces and became like chaff on a threshing floor.
Another analogy.
When you, in those days, when they would bring in the grain from the field, it was on a stalk, and the majority of it was worthless, but you needed to separate the chaff, which was the unusable part, from the part that was usable, which was going to be the grain that was going to be ground into a flour. And so he's saying that the whole statue was broken into pieces, and it was like, it must have been so fine, these pieces, that it became like this chaff on a threshing floor. And they have a thing called a willowing fork that they would take this after it had been ground up but not separated yet, and they would take that and throw it in the air, and the wind would blow the chaff away, and the grain would fall back down onto onto the threshing floor, because you're threshing. That's the process.
Also an analogy used for salvation, separating the wheat and the tares.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace. So, going back, this stone that was carved out or cut out of a rock hit the feet of the statue. The whole statue was being supported, of course, by the feet, so the whole statue came down, and it was broken into pieces so fine that it was like the chaff, which would look like a dust on a threshing floor, and the wind swept them away without leaving a trace. So when we find out that the statue represents all the kingdoms of the world, starting with we're going to talk about that when I get back.
Nebuchadnezzar being the gold head.
Nebuchadnezzar being the gold head, right, and the Medo-Persian would have been the two parts. It was no longer just one. So what he's saying is, don't get used to your position.
Yeah.
Because I'm telling you more than you're even going to be alive to see. You're not going to see the Greek come in. You're not going to see the Romans come in. You're not going to see any of this coming in.
You're not going to see TikTok.
Don't forget about the stone becoming a mountain.
That's right. Now, no wonder the king had trouble sleeping. Yeah, I'd be having trouble sleeping too. The wind swept them away without a trace, but that rock that struck the statue, remember the rock? It became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth, verse 35. And you can think about it, you can read ahead, and you can see exactly what that huge mountain is. But it's a huge mountain that's never going to be destroyed. This was the dream, and next will come the interpretation. This should prove to the king that Daniel had indeed been told the dream which no one else could have understood.
Well,
So
so
he-
convincing. I don't know what would.
Yeah, the wise men should have been very happy with Daniel.
They weren't that wise though.
No, they weren't. Their lives had been saved by the one living and true God, the creator of the universe. So if God never does something for just one person in the audience, he does it for everybody that hears and everybody that sees. It can affect. And so I think the hope is, of course, the major hope is that Nebuchadnezzar would see the light and understand that this God is really somebody that we should pay attention to. Later on in his life, he will see the light. As we get to that point, you'll see what I mean. It's a great story of redemption. But it's also for these people like these enchanters, these magicians, these wise men, supposedly. This was designed for them to see what was going on. And for them to get the big picture. For them to understand that I do believe that all of these people that had these positions thought that they were receiving the power from their gods. And yet, in their mind, they must have in the evening gone home and said to themselves, how come you didn't tell me the interpretation to this dream? My whole life depends on knowing what this dream is all about. The king's just being unfair. No king has ever asked anybody to do anything like this. So he makes a big deal about it, or they make a big deal about it.
Politicians, man.
Yeah, and then, yeah, if you're in the inner circle of the kingdom, then you bet politics do take place. So next week, we're gonna hear the meaning of the dream. We had the dream.
The week after.
Yeah, the week after, exactly. Exactly. It will have a great meaning for this great king. For it will speak of his future and that of his kingdom. God is indeed using Daniel to open the eyes of the king as well as his servants. Now, whether that's going to happen or not. Was this something I said? He needs to humble himself before a God that he has never recognized. And Nebuchadnezzar has never recognized them. Remember, up to this point, most of the world recognized multiple gods. They were pagans. They had usually a major god, and then they had little minor gods that were one of fertility and one that would give their crops. Maybe a god of war that would protect them in battle, and so on and so forth. But they're going to get an opportunity. Whether they're going to take it or not is another story. Okay.